they're going to save money on it, like 4 to 5% on their utility bills. Has that been your experience in an RTO area?
No, 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 no. The ratepayers end up paying more, it's almost a question you're not allowed to ask. Are RTOs more expensive?
Welcome to PowerGab, your show about energy and environmental policy from a Colorado perspective. We're the only ones who do it here in the state of Colorado, looking specifically at energy and environmental policy and how that affects every single Coloradan. I'm Amy Cooke, I'm your host, and I'm actually in studio today. But who is not here? Jake Fogleman, who's looking awfully relaxed.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Like Amy pointed out, we've actually switched places this week. I'm here from sunny Southwest Florida, zooming in for this episode, but I'm very excited to be here and very excited for our special guest we have this episode.
Yeah, I am too. Friend, mentor, utility industry expert, and author of one of the best books on the grid, and something we're going to talk about today. Regional transmission organizations. What the heck are those? You're going to find out in just a moment as we welcome Meredith Angwin. Meredith, welcome to the show. We're so thrilled to have you.
I'm delighted to be here. I really enjoyed meeting you in Chicago a couple of months ago, and I'm just happy to see you again.
Well, I'm a little bit, I'm kind of embarrassed. I might be your biggest fan, and I am trying to start a Meredith Angwin fan club, of which I will be the president. But Meredith, we brought you on specifically for a reason, besides the fact that we could just talk about regional transmission organizations versus vertically integrated monopolies and utilities and power generation and transmission line. But we brought you on specifically because in Colorado, a law was passed in 2021. And my guess is most Coloradans don't even know about it. And it is, Colorado is a vertically integrated utility system. In other words, Xcel Energy, which is the state's largest utility, has a monopoly on certain areas of the state. There is another one, Black Hills, which also has a designated consumer base that it services, and then there are co-ops throughout rural Colorado. But what I don't think most people realize is that we are going to be disrupting that system, and we are going to have to go into a regional transmission organization, an RTO, by 2030. And that's why we brought you on, besides the fact that we just like you and want you to come on to PowerGab anytime you want. But you wrote what I would call the definitive book on it. You know what it is. I think it's the best book I have read on RTOs, on transmission, on what is happening with our grid, shorting the grid, the hidden fragility of our electric grid. Get the book if you don't have it. But Meredith, that's the biggest reason why we brought you on today, is so that you could sort of give us, you've been in one of these systems, you're in one of these systems, you've written about them. Give us a preview. Can we expect in Colorado? And I guess probably the first question, what the heck is an RTO?
Okay, an RTO is a system that doesn't work by the vertically integrated rules. The vertically integrated rules is a utility is responsible for everything. It's responsible for keeping enough generation on site, and it's responsible for running that generation and for distributing it. In an RTO, the distribution utilities, the ones that have wires to your home, buy power from other utilities that are called generation utilities. And those generation utilities are often called merchant generators, which means that they sell. They're not in charge of getting it to your house. They just sell it to the distribution utility. One of the things that this does is it completely divides the responsibility for reliable power. And so, for example, your distribution utility cannot get power if there's not enough power available from your generation utilities. The distribution utility is like, hey, not my problem. And if the generation utilities go offline because they're having a problem, one of them is to say, I'm a merchant generator. I just don't happen to have anything to give you right now. I'm not responsible. So you see, the vertically integrated utilities have an obligation to serve, and neither the merchant generators don't. I'm going to, at one point, someone said to me, well, Meredith, you like monopolies. That was an insult. And I said, no, you don't understand. I don't care about if it's a monopoly or not a monopoly. I like accountability. And that is what we have lost as we move to the RTOs. We no longer have accountability for reliability. If you don't mind, I'd like to begin some screen sharing now, but maybe, is that okay?
Yeah,
okay, great.
So Meredith, while you're bringing up your slides, one of the things that I want to let people know, the biggest problem with ERCOT, which is the Texas grid, the Texas RTO, is that nobody knows who to blame for the blackouts that occurred during Winter Storm Uri in 2021. So 246 people died. The state was 4.5 minutes away from a complete collapse. And everybody is pointing fingers at each other because, to Meredith's point, if the merchant utility, if the one who's actually selling the power doesn't have it, they're like, well, we don't have it. I can't sell you anything. You go to the grocery store, they're out of bread, and they don't, they're like, well, I don't have it. There's nothing you can do about it. But the point being, no one is in charge of it, and there is no accountability. And Jake, do you want to add anything to that before we let Meredith dive into her slides?
No, I was just, it's helpful for her to set the stage, because I think a lot of our listeners, at least longtime followers of the work we've done at II, know we have our problems too with the vertically integrated monopoly utility system, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the alternatives out there are not without their problems as well. So I'm very grateful for Meredith for laying the table, and then I'm interested to see what she has on these slides to help our listeners learn more about this proposed alternative that we seem to be heading towards.
I always like to start by explaining what I consider to be a good grid, a positive experience of a grid. And that is a strong grid which has reliable electricity, relatively inexpensive electricity, so electricity can be used for health and happiness and manufacturing, and electricity made with low levels of pollution and ecosystem disruption. Robert Bryce, a friend of mine, has what he calls the iron law of electricity. If you can't get clean electricity, you'll take any kind of electricity you can get. And because people will get electricity, and if you don't remember that reliable electricity is key, then you're going to be in trouble. So let me talk a little bit about RTOs. The first thing is I want to talk about the fact there are actually, in a way, two grids. There's a physical grid and a policy grid. And when you're reading the paper, you're as likely to read about one or the other or another aspect of the grids. So a physical grid is, you have transmission lines and distribution. You have a dispatcher who says, okay, this power plant has to go online because our demand on the grid is going up. And then later in the evening, they say, okay, you're done for the day. So they're the dispatchers. You have linemen. And then most of the physical grid issues are limited by physics. The policy grid is mainly about how the physical grid gets paid, and it includes many, many things that have been put in place to encourage one kind of grid or another: net zero, net metering, renewable portfolio standards, and so forth. So I think it's important to understand that they're different. And sometimes the grids get confused, sometimes by planning. That is, the people who are confusing the grids are planning to confuse the grids. For example, I was in favor of a Vermont Yankee, which is a nuclear power plant here in Vermont, continuing to operate, and there was a lot of opposition to it. And Vermont Yankee had contracts with Vermont utilities that ended in 2012. Yankee still had a license with the NRC and so forth. So they continued operations selling into the auctions, which I'll talk about in a minute, until 2014. But in 2013, when the contracts ended, anti-nuclear people said, well, Vermont Yankee, we don't need it. We're not even using it right now. But they were using it because Vermont Yankee was using Vermont was using Vermont making Yankee power, because changing a contract, say, oh, we're not in contract with you anymore, that doesn't change the power lines. That doesn't change the physical grid. And when Vermont Yankee went away, there was a hole in the physical grid, and it was filled mostly with natural gas from neighboring states and some with imports from Quebec. But I just think it's very important to explain that when you're reading about the grid, you should think about, am I reading about the physical grid or am I reading about the policy grid? And I just want to say one other thing, and that is the could grid. What I mean by that is sometimes I'll give this whole talk, and I'll be talking about various complicated things, which I won't go into in this short discussion, about capacity auctions, ancillary auctions and energy auctions and how they all work and so forth and so on. And I want to question. I know I've given you too much to think about, but I want a question. And someone will ask a question about, I heard there's a new kind of battery. And this is exactly what I mean by the could grid. If you are reading the local paper, you are more likely to learn about the could grid, the grids that, somebody has just discovered something and we're going to build a pilot plant any moment now and so forth. So I just want to say that I can't keep track of all the things that are suggested for the could grid. And I basically want to teach people about the grid we have and what could change on it, rather than get off into assessment of the could grid. Do you have any comments on that?
I'm just writing it down because we always we do our takeaways. Meredith, at the end of the show, we'll do, what are our takeaways? And I think knowing that there are 3 grids that often get confused, that is a great way to think about it. Is it the physical grid? Is it the policy grid? Or is it what you call the could grid or the imagined grid? That's a great way to put it. Jake, do you?
I was just about to say, emphasizing the could grid, because as Meredith pointed out, that's the grid we hear so much about from pontificators on high about, well, we could do this and we could just tinker with this, and it's really up to the engineers in the physical grid to actually try to make that a reality, and ratepayers like us to try to fund this sort of stuff. So it's great to put it in that sort of framing.
Thank you. I just I'm really happy to do that. There's the battery breakthroughs and so forth. So the next question you had was, what are RTOs? So I'm going to be relatively, I know this is a very short time, so I'm going to, regional transmission organizations. Here's a picture. I think that's good. These are the different regional transmission organizations. Now, if you notice that there's a lot of area, including where you live in Colorado, which is white, while the different regional transmission organizations are different colors, orange and light purple, or I guess light green and light purple. So this really shows you where we have regional transmission organizations. Those are the bright parts of the map here, and the other areas are vertically integrated. And I want to say that when you move to a regional transmission organization, the accountability goes away. It's hard to really describe these as totally regional. Look at that Southwest Power Pool, which has some interesting stuff going on in North Dakota, but then again, MISO also has North Dakota. It's not as regional as you'd think, but nevertheless, they're supposed to be regional transmission organizations. And those are the ones you hear about all the time, don't you? You hear about California ISO. You hear about ERCOT. You know, how many times have you heard about PJM recently? Oh, no, I'm sorry, not PJM, but Duke Power recently over in the Southeast here. Not very often.
But you're
So,
right. You're right, Meredith. We hear about, especially MISO a lot right now, which is Midwest Interconnection. I'll get it wrong if I try to do with the acronym, but it's system operator. The point being, all of these are worried about reliability right now. I mean, we read Utility Dive a lot. I mean, Jake and I have shared where we get our information or where we go. Utility Dive is one of them. And they are talking about reliability, and they're talking about it a lot. And they're saying it out loud. The quiet part's being said out loud. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Meredith.
No, you're absolutely right. The ISO areas are the ones that have the reliability problems mostly. Now, any area can have a reliability problem, especially in really awful weather. I mean, if a hurricane lands in Florida, there may be some outages there, and it hasn't got any. But the ISO areas have a particular kind of reliability problem, which is that they don't build enough power plants. They don't have enough power plants. And that is called resource adequacy. There's not enough resources to meet their needs.
So why don't they build enough?
Because of the way RTOs are governed. And that I wrote a book about it. They can't be the group that's planning to build a new power plant can't be guaranteed to have a rate of return on that power plant. It can't be expected to make money on that power plant. It could lose money. It could be out of business. And so it says, oh, this is too risky. You know, utilities are not supposed to be risky. They have to have power all the time for safety. And when you begin looking at utilities can't build a power plant because it's too risky, then that is a problem. So let me look at these two. Traditionally vertically integrated utility, the utility is responsible for reliability. It owns the power plants and distribution systems. It may not own all of the power plants. It may own part of a power plant. For example, a bunch of rural electric cooperatives get together to buy a power plant. It receives a rate of return set by regulators, and the state PUC is its major regulator. In the RTO areas, there's nobody responsible for reliability. The people who are generating the power generally are not going to be affected, except that they won't make money if they go offline. Distribution utilities buy that power at auctions run by RTOs. I'll talk about that in a moment. And regulation is multi-level and easily gamed. So let me go on to we've got to look at the auctions. I mean, if you don't look at the auctions, you don't understand the RTOs. Oh, first I have to say that this is important too, and I should have gone to it first. Every grid, whether it's an RTO or not, has a balancing authority. And here's a picture of our ISO New England balancing authority. Those are all the major substations, all the major lines, several people watching things all the time. They're watching how much the demand is, how much the demand varies from yesterday's prediction of the demand, whether they're watching TV screens to see if there's like a big fire that's knocking out some area so that it isn't getting any power. It's just amazing. They're tracking in our area, they're tracking LNG tankers coming into Boston. It's really quite an amazing thing. But the reason they're so busy is that the amount of electricity used and the supply have to be in balance all the time. So when you talked about they were 4 minutes away from losing the grid in Texas, they didn't have enough supply. And after that goes on for about 4 minutes, the machines themselves, the electric generators themselves, begin shutting themselves down because otherwise they'll find themselves, really being hurt by the fact that they're not running properly. And so it has to be in balance all the time. And that's what the balancing authority people do. For what it's worth, I would like to say that my own experience is that a lot of the people in the balancing authority came up through the nuclear navy, for whatever that's worth. They really understand keeping things going and if you're on a submarine, anything that goes wrong could be life-threatening. So these people are pretty darn careful and pretty darn serious, and we're happy to have them. Though, of course, as a woman, I'd like to see more women in the room. So okay. So here's how the energy auctions work. There are several kinds of auctions, but I am aware that I don't have all day here. So the energy auctions are the main ones. They're the ones that every RTO has. The other auctions, ancillary and capacity, some RTOs have, some RTOs don't have. So the energy auctions run every 5 minutes, and they're economic dispatch. So what happens is that let's say that all the plants have bids. They're bidding into the auctions, and so let's say that there's plant A bidding in at $20 per megawatt hour, plant B at 30, and plant C at 40. So it turns out that the balancing authority looks at the situation and says, oh, we need all these plants. Every one of these plants has to be on the grid to keep it in balance. And that means that the announcement goes out for this 5 minutes. All your plants are needed, and you will all receive the clearing price, that is $40 per megawatt hour, set by plant C. You might have bid in at 20, but you're getting 40. Okay.
Wow.
So you basically, a plant wants to bid in low and be paid high. So of course, one of the ways that, of course, no one would really do this, but you could take a plant or two offline, and then they'd have to bring on a more expensive plant, and then all the plants would get more money. It's amazing. Supposedly we have a market monitor who has no enforcement power whatsoever, but who prevents this.
with no authority. Yeah. Okay.
No authority. Right.
Okay.
And then there's even weirder things that go on. For example, at one point, ERCOT just declared that the clearing price was $9,000. Anyway, moving along.
ERCOT's $9,000? That's okay.
Per megawatt hour.
Well, so you're going to get a big bill then. Okay.
Yes. Well, you're going to get a big bill if your distribution utility passes it through directly to you. Most of the time, the distribution utilities just move it in to future bills. So you won't actually get a big bill that day, but you'll get bigger bills for who knows how long. But in ERCOT, if you signed up for Gridley, which was or some of the others that passed through immediately, some people who usually pay $200 a month for their air conditioning and heating and this and that got bills of like $2,500.
Oh.
So that was kind of it was what you might call noticeable.
All right. Okay. Let's go.
So now I want to talk about one of the things that happens here is that plant A is almost always going to be chosen, right? Because it's the cheapest plant that I showed. What if you had a plant that bid in it, I'll pay you $20 to take my power? that's even cheaper. And as a matter of fact, that's exactly what happens. The wind turbines and the solar plants get outside funding of various sorts, some directly from the government and some because they can sell a mental construct, which is a renewable energy certificate. They say, I made this much renewable energy and I'm selling the certificate to you because you're in a different state, but you have to buy that much renewable energy. Now, I'm not selling the energy, you understand, I need it, but I'm selling you the certificate. And so the other state, so they can get like $60 from the sell their production tax credit and renewable energy certificates, and they can bid in it. I'll pay you $20, and so
they're still making $40 per megawatt, even though they're giving it away.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it.
So then I want to tell you something that I really didn't understand for a while, and I finally figured it out. So I'm going to explain it to everybody because I'm so proud of myself. I didn't understand how grids go negative so often. RTO grids go negative so often. And I said, look, very rarely is 100% of the power on this grid coming from wind and solar. So why are they going negative so often? And I said, okay, what is this? Well, it turns out that this is part of economic dispatch with the cheapest plants first. And so you see your negative priced wind turbine will get on because it's paying to give you its power. But why does the whole grid get it all? Well, it turns out that there's a little extra twist to this, and that is if you are a plant that self-schedules, you have to take whatever the clearing price is, not counting yourself or any other plant that self-schedules. So for example, let's say you're a self-scheduling nuclear plant. So the day before the auctions, you call the ISO balancing authority, or you email them or whatever, and you say, hi guys, I'm planning to run 100% tomorrow, just like I did today. And the people say at the balancing authority, great, we're really glad to have you. And you'll be self-scheduled. Okay, good. At that point, self-scheduled, what it means is whatever the clearing price is, the other plants, the plants we dispatch or are dispatched because they're lowest price, they will set the clearing price. So the self-scheduling baseload plant is not allowed to bid. It may cost $20 or $30 per megawatt hour to put its power on the grid, but it may be getting minus $20 per megawatt hour. And so this is a really great way that baseload plants get driven off the grid it's one of the ways in RTO areas. And so I just wanted to do one more thing here because I feel that there's one of the ways grids go bad quickly is they have over-reliance on renewables that start and stop on their own schedule. They back up the renewables with natural gas, which is delivered just in time and sometimes not available because it's being used by, it's not available to the power plants because it's been used by homeowners to heat their houses in the winter. And then there's overdependence on the neighbors who are having the same weather as your own grid and may not be willing to share. And I think that's my last slide. So there we go.
Hey, Meredith, thanks so much. This is great. And by the way, we'll have a link to this on our website on i2i.org. We'll have it there, but we'll have that link in the show notes. And I have a real quick question. We don't have a lot of time, but actually I've got a couple of things. One of the things that they were saying in Colorado is, okay, so they actually don't think reliability will be an issue. I think that's wrong. I think reliability is going to be a huge issue. But they say that ratepayers are going to save money. They're going to save money on it, like 4 to 5% on their utility bills. Has that been your experience in an RTO area?
No. The ratepayers end up paying more, and it's almost a question you're not allowed to ask. Are RTOs more expensive? But when I tried to do some research on it for my book, whatever research I could find showed RTOs. One was from a man in University of Georgia. Then there was some people at University of Berkeley, business school, and so forth. But basically, RTOs were more expensive. They just were. Now, you say, well, why are these people lying to me saying it's cheaper? You see, the thing is that the prices on the grid, remember I told you they could even go negative. The prices, the clearing prices are often lower than the prices that were being given to the generators before. You see, so they say,
Yeah.
oh, clearing prices are lower, but that clearing prices are lower does not equal the consumer prices being lower. You see, it just doesn't equal that. There are all kinds of reasons. First of all, remember I told you that this utility sold a REC. Well, who bought the REC? It was a distribution utility that had to meet its renewable portfolio standards. Where does that distribution utility get money from? From you. You know, and so there's so all of a sudden in the overhead of your distribution utility, you're seeing purchased RECs, except it isn't called as purchased RECs. So what I'm saying is, as a rule, the RTOs make it easier because there's nobody to blame to put a lot of to shut down nuclear plants and coal plants and all kinds of reliable plants. And then they also have expenses related to all kinds of shenanigans, such as, the purchasing RECs and hiding them in your distribution utility overhead.
I think another thing. Go ahead, Jake.
I just wanted to piggyback off that because I follow the literature on this as well. And a lot of the times what they'll find is RTOs will deliver wholesale savings. And I think even the PUC study that we're going to link in the show notes, the PUC study that the Colorado PUC was ordered to perform for this bill to mandate our switch to RTOs, they phrased it as 4 to 5% in utility savings. They did not say 4 to 5% in ratepayer savings. They said utility savings. So yeah, the generation, the dispatch at the wholesale level becomes more efficient and they can probably save some money. But to your point, whether that gets to the end, to the ratepayer when he gets his monthly bill, there's not much evidence for that.
Hey, good catch. The other thing I want to bring up real quick, and before we close the show out, and Jake, because he's remote, gets to do the three takeaways, is the accountability piece, because I think that's huge. You mentioned that, Meredith, that no one's accountable. No one is held. I mean, who do you blame? Can't blame a merchant generator, because if they don't have power, they don't have power to sell. The distributor says, well, I don't have power to buy. No one is accountable. And it gets worse than that, because many of these organizations, at least from what I've found in my research, is that they're nonprofits. Nonprofits are not subject to any kind of an open records law. So who are you going to petition? You're going to petition your Public Utilities Commission, which will just say, listen, you got to take it up with the Regional Transmission Organization, because we aren't in charge of that anymore. That isn't what we're doing. You go to the RTO and we're a nonprofit. We don't allow the media in. We aren't subject to open records law. We're a nonprofit. We are essentially turning over the nation's largest, probably most complicated machine that we have to have. You mentioned it earlier. You want the cleanest, cheapest power until you need any power, in which case you'll take whatever you can get, because power, we have to have power to live. We have to. People die if you don't have power. And that's a piece too that often gets missed in this, is we are turning over our grid to an unelected, unaccountable nonprofit, and we don't even know who those people are.
Yes, that's true. That is true. I mean, I was actually I had been involved in some, community, basically county commissions back in the day, and we had these sunshine laws and we had all this stuff, but the RTO doesn't have that. You do not have, you cannot get into an RTO meeting. I mean, it was considered like a big deal when I kept pushing that our consumer liaison group should meet with the RTO C-suite people, and we did. But it was like, well, that's that Meredith. She keeps wanting to do all this crazy, Anyway, so
Hey,
yeah.
hey, Meredith, where can people find your book?
Well, you can find it on Amazon. You can also go into your local bookstore and order it from the bookstore, which will get it from Ingram Spark, which delivers to bookstores. Your bookstore will almost certainly not stock it. It's available on Barnes & Noble and Nook. You can order it through Walmart, and there's all kinds of ways. And also, I with a little pitch here for the fact that a friend of mine who is also a opera singer did the audiobook, and people have said very nice things about the audiobook. So if you're looking for an audiobook, you can find that too.
I actually listened to it too. I've both read it and listened to it. So you're right. Your friend did a fabulous job. Hey, Jake, we have to close out the show. So what are our takeaways? I know you're on vacation, but and I appreciate the fact you're doing a little work right now.
Yeah, no problem. I'm always happy to tune in, especially when we have such a great guest. So takeaway number one for me is Meredith's discussion of the 3 grids. There's your policy grid, there's your physical grid, there's your policy grid, which is where the machinations of NGOs and lawmakers and idealists come to kind of monkey with the actual physical grid. And then I really love the inclusion of the could grid. I think that's a great way to phrase it, because that's really where the machinations come, where it's the scientists are working on this incredible month-long duration battery storage, and if we just plug that into the grid, we don't have to worry about intermittency ever again, and it's all theoretical, and it's all going to cause problems if those people get the leverage of power with the physical grid. Takeaway number 2, I think, is the transparency key. The big difference between the vertically integrated monopoly utilities and the RTO system is that transparency component. Monopolies have their own issues with transparency, but at the end of the day, if they screw up, at least the General Assembly can haul Robert Kenney from Excel in and make him sit in front of the Joint Commission on Utility Rates and ask him why things went the way they did. And if things really went off the rails, the state of Colorado theoretically could revoke Excel's charter. There's no real accountability like that for the RTO system. So I think that's a key piece. And then the third takeaway is, I know it got chopped down a little bit because of our time constraints, but Meredith's fatal trifecta is increasingly going to be important for a state like Colorado, especially as we move to this RTO system. That 2030 cutoff date is when our coal is supposed to be theoretically phased off of the grid. So it really will just be renewables, just-in-time natural gas, and then imports when that fails, asking for imports from our neighboring states. So things are going to get tight if we head down that road, and that fatal trifecta is something to keep in mind as we get closer to that date. So
that's a great one. And I'll add to it, what do I always end with? Get a generator. We're going to get your generator. I don't care what kind, what brand, but make sure you have something to power your home. But thanks, everybody, for tuning into this episode of PowerGab. And if you like this, share it with your friends. And also, you know the drill. Make sure you give it a thumbs up on YouTube. You share it with friends. You subscribe. You do all the things that we need to keep PowerGab going. And you can find it on YouTube on IITV. So IITV on YouTube. We'll be there. And thanks again for tuning in to this episode of PowerGab. And we'll see you all next week.